I'm not sure, Robin. Are you on?
Yeah, I just unmuted it.
Okay, boy, we're doing good now. Okay, with gratitude and respect that this meeting is taking place on the traditional unceded land of the Mi'kmaq people, the Abequid First Nation, and we are grateful for the opportunity and their stewardship of the land. The second thing on our agenda, which I was made to put on, is declarations of conflict of interest. Anybody come into a lot of money or anything like that lately?
A lot.
So, okay.
I wish.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you. Okay, so no conflicts of interest. Approval of agenda, which we have in front of us. Those of you on the phone call, I don't know if you have it, but we're not going to change it. Can I get some consensus for approval of the agenda? Excellent. I just saw that consensus. Thank you. Okay. And we have people with us today besides committee members. We have Robert Zilke, city planner, and Alex Forbes is, what's your title?
I'm the manager of planning.
Manager of planning, important job. And we're very grateful to see the mayor here today. And also, we are very grateful to Michelle Richard for journeying off the mainland over here, meeting us in person from Moncton. She is CMHC's, I think, Atlantic Manager for Multi-Units and Client Solutions.
Say that one.
And thank you for joining us. Also on the line, we have Marina Slutsky, Outreach and Project Development with CMHC. And we also have Mike Podger, who is a new member of our committee and is accidentally in Pennsylvania instead of here, but he has joined us by phone. We appreciate that. We are sorry for your long distance charges. And one other person, I think, do you have another colleague?
I'm not sure if Alex is on the line. Is she on the line?
I'm Alex Lamoureux, a senior specialist with the government relations team with CMHC.
Great. Welcome everyone. It's very exciting. And we decided we would put all the usual business stuff at the end of the meeting so that we don't jump into time and cut time off for Michelle. We appreciate your willingness to come over and talk to us. So the floor is yours.
Perfect, thank you. So it's great to be here in person. I was sharing with a few of you that this is actually the first in-person meeting since the beginning of the pandemic. So it's and also my first time on the island. So it's great. I think it's we've learned to master the use of technology during the pandemic, but there's nothing like an in-person meeting to share business. So so I'm going to start this session. When I spoke to Bob, we talked about a few topics. We could talk about affordable housing and housing in general for a very long time. There's a lot of issues or concerns that we're currently seeing. So I'm going to try to cover a very high level of CMHC, what we're seeing nationally, what we're seeing here on the island. And Marina afterwards is going to talk a little bit about the programs that we currently have and what we're trying to achieve with the National Housing Strategy. But we want to make sure that we leave time at the end for questions. So if there's any topics that we didn't cover in depth enough or anything that we've missed that you'd like to talk about, we welcome your questions, comments, concerns, and we can forward after the fact more information if it's needed. So I think what I'd like to start saying is that what many people don't realize is that CMHC is one of Canada's largest financial institutions. As Canada's national housing agency, CMHC exists to house Canadians. Our commercial products, like our mortgage loan insurance, plays an important role in supporting a stable, well-functioning housing system. We also have research and policy experts that provide trusted knowledge and advice to all the participants of the housing system in order to make better housing decisions. However, what we'd like to talk more about today is affordable housing programs and initiatives offered through the multi-billion-dollar National Housing Strategy. The NHS creates home for Canadians along the housing continuum. So the strategy covers right from homelessness, affordable housing, social housing, public housing, right through to market rental as well as home ownership. And since the inception of the National Housing Strategy, we've supported several developments right here in Charlottetown and across the province of PEI. And Marina will touch on that in her presentation, and she'll feature a couple that we've supported. And we're happy to talk about the others as well if you have any questions. We just want to give you an idea of the types of projects that we've supported and the need for rental housing in the province. A lack of supply is one of the factors feeding the housing crisis that we face in this country, and you've seen it firsthand here on the island as well. So we've set ourselves a bold aspiration, and that is that by 2030, every Canadian has a home that they can afford and that meets their needs. This aspiration is compelling because it's essential for creating a Canada that is truly equitable, a place where everyone can fulfill their potential and thrive. Canada's housing market has been remarkably robust for some time now, and that's exposed some serious weaknesses for both renters and buyers. Despite historically declining or low interest rates, shelter costs as a percentage of disposable incomes have been slowly trending up since the early 2000s. In fact, we're actually seeing two affordability crises right now. One affecting households renting and buying, who are finding it increasingly hard to access market housing, and another affecting vulnerable populations who are struggling to have even their most basic needs met. The first is the result of a long continued trend of escalating house prices, which is worse now than any other time over the last 30 years. Fast rising prices aren't new in cities like Toronto and Vancouver, but what is new is that the problem is growing and expanding to cities and towns across the country, and you've seen that here in Charlottetown as well. The COVID pandemic has only made matters worse. On PEI, an increase in construction costs as well as the skilled labor shortage are contributing to this phenomenon. The situation isn't much better for those renting. We've seen PEI's vacancy rate has been below 2% since 2016. We typically say that a vacancy rate of 3% is considered healthy and a good balance between tenants and owners. Below 2% means a high rental demand. These conditions make it challenging for anyone looking for a rental apartment, and a low vacancy also puts pressures on affordability. So when we look at the housing continuum, it's really hard to address affordability if there's a supply issue. And why does high housing prices matter, and what does it mean for residents of PEI? It means that they have less money to spend on goods and services. And rising interest rates will make matters worse, especially in Canadian households now owe record levels of debt. So we're currently seeing $1.72 for every dollar of disposable income earned. This is near historical peak. They also matter for the economy of the city. Some 13% of Canadian households are currently in core housing need. In PEI, it's currently approximately 8.5%. That means that they're currently spending in excess of 30% of their income on housing or are living in inadequate or unsuitable housing. And that brings me to talk a little bit about the affordability definition. What is affordable housing? That's a question that we get asked a lot. And by purpose or intentionally, there's not one fixed definition of affordability, because affordability means different things to different people. So as I mentioned before, when there's a supply issue, it's going to put a lot of pressure on the left-hand side of the continuum. So we have different programs and initiatives that are going to target different segment of the population, and affordability is going to differ based on the population that we're targeting. So we don't want to restrict ourselves as affordability or what some people would call public housing. We have market housing that for the middle class, and affordability is going to look different. So every program based on who we target the definition is going to be adjusted accordingly. So when we look at Canada's housing system, it is very complex, and there's several reasons for the steep and continued price escalation. However, the main problem is that supply simply isn't keeping pace with the demand, and it hasn't been for years. Demand for all types of homes has surged across Canada, especially in fast-growing major cities and large economic regions. We have the fastest population growth of any G7 nation and need to match this growth with more homes. This summer, CMHC will be releasing an in-depth report that uses the latest indicators to assess how much housing supply will be needed in the coming years. The answer then seems simple: to build more housing. And that's what we continue to encourage at CMHC through the National Housing Strategy and its suite of supply-oriented programs. Our 10-year, more than $72 billion strategy aims to create 180,000 new units, but even that won't solve the housing supply crunch by itself. When we look at the National Housing Strategy since it's been announced in 2017, we've announced in PEI the support of approximately 400 units. We have just as many currently that we're working through the process that haven't been announced yet, but we have added a lot of supply on PEI through the National Housing Strategy. However, what we know is needed is not just money, it's partnership and more people at the table working together and aligning our priorities. Because even closing the current supply gap won't be enough. We need to ensure that the supply is more responsive to future increase in demand. Otherwise, the problem will just keep continuing getting worse. The barriers do include inflexible processes and long timelines in the pre-construction phase at a municipal level. In the latest budget, the federal government has announced the Housing Accelerator Fund that's going to help cities to speed up the process. There's also the issue of NIMBYism. So cities are struggling to find the right balance between community engagement and expediting approvals for development. The concerns of existing homeowners often win out over housing projects that align with the demands of the population growth, climate, and equitable access to the economic opportunities for our cities. A couple of months ago, we supported a National Housing Supply Summit that was hosted by the federal government as well as the Federation for Canadian Municipalities, which I believe you participated in. This brought together partners from all orders of government as well as the nonprofit and private sectors to discuss ways to unlock supply barriers. It was clear that there's no single magic approach that will solve our housing issues, but it was also clear that we need to work together to solve them. It's our country's future economic strength and social cohesion that's at stake. In his recent book, Values, Mark Carney argues that the public sector can provide a foundation for solutions to our current day problems, but the private sector's ability to finance, explore, and operationalize will be the driving force. And I agree with that, especially in the case of housing, because we see most of the supply coming from the private sector. CMHC has been bringing this message to many different partners. So we've recently heard from a few different financial institutions. We have the Bank of Montreal, Scotiabank, as well as Van City that committed in excess of $22 billion in funding finance affordable housing projects over the next decade. We're also connecting with smaller private sector partners who are looking at the problem from different angles and bringing new solutions to the table. Simply put, we just need to do things differently and work together. We've also recently heard the budget 2022. Housing was on every platform in the latest federal election. And in the latest budget, we saw more than $10 billion in new investments in housing, which represents roughly a third of the federal budget. This reflects a growing awareness of Canadians about the serious nature of our country's housing challenges. It also recognizes the key role of housing affordability in building a resilient, sustainable economy where everyone has a chance to prosper and thrive. Much of the new housing investments will be delivered through CMHC. We're committed to working with partners like yourselves to make the most of these investments and to continue to be a company that Canadians can count on. So if I just highlight the major, so when we're talking about the budget, it's still very recent, as you know. Everything that we can share is public and on the federal government's website, but I just thought that I'd highlight the big lines of the budget. So they've committed to doubling the housing construction over the next decade, helping Canadians buy their first home, protecting buyers and renters. They're also looking to curb unfair practices that drive up price of housing, continuing to fight homelessness and support housing affordability, particularly for the most vulnerable, addressing the housing needs of Indigenous people, and increasing funding toward the Canada Greener Homes Loan Program. So, in conclusion, I want to close by challenging you to think about how you, as Charlottetown's Affordable Housing Advisory Committee, can contribute. You have influence, diverse expertise, and you understand the local unique challenges. And most importantly, you have a stake in making housing more affordable in your city. So what do you see as some of the housing challenges in Charlottetown? What are some potential solutions? There's new ideas to be found in so many places, from the country's largest corporations to councils in rural municipalities to community organization and grassroots movements. But even the most promising ideas won't achieve success without the right support. If you have a solution to propose, you can count on CMHC's support to work to the best of our abilities. You can count on us for expertise and advice. We'd be happy to work with you to connect you with other partners or funding opportunity, because we'll all benefit from building stronger communities. We'll all win by making Canada's housing system more affordable, sustainable, inclusive, and climate compatible in the years ahead. So we really appreciate the invite today. Now I'll pass it to Marina, who is joining us by phone, and she's going to talk about specific programs and initiatives that we have. She's also going to highlight a few projects that we've supported in PEI.
Okay, I'm going to interrupt Marina, excuse me for a moment, take a breath, and just identify some of the people that have wandered in so we know who we're talking with. Hi.
I'm here. I'm Emily Trainer. I'm a planner at the Planning and Heritage Department, and I'm here just for information for us if y'all want to learn about what CMHC is doing. Yes.
We're thrilled to have you here. We need more of the planning department, always. And Paul Krant is a member of our committee. And Paul, what's your job? It's interesting.
You mean what I do for
Your real job.
Yeah,
Yes.
real job.
You get paid money.
I work for Bank of Montreal. That's a commercial lender.
Yeah, okay. Great, thank you. And we have news that Ashley Gillis is surprisingly in COVID protocols today, unexpected by her, and she sends her regrets. So, okay, Marina, thank you for waiting.
No problem. Do we need a couple seconds to set up the slides, or are they good to go?
It's all set up.
Okay, thank you so much. So, hi everyone. Super happy to be with you today to talk about the National Housing Strategy and our funding opportunities as well. And as Michelle said, provide some examples of funded projects too. Thank you for welcoming me by phone. I know it's probably a little bit weird to have just a voice talking at you, but I'm really grateful for your flexibility and for being so welcoming, and a little bit jealous of Michelle that she gets to be there in person. So my name is Marina Fruitsy. I'm a specialist on our outreach and project development team. And so my role is really around knowledge transfer, to make connections between different potential partners, or generally just groups maybe working in the same direction in a regional context or a provincial context or even federally, just so groups are really able to learn from one another and to leverage work being done elsewhere if they're kind of chipping away at a similar problem. We also do lots of work around supporting municipalities on different types of tools that are out there that can be put into place to support the development of affordable housing, and I'm going to chat a little bit about that towards the end of my presentation. And then finally, we also work with groups to get them to a point where they're ready to submit an application to CMHC for one of our programs. After that, we work really closely with the regional specialists on Michelle's team to really support you to apply. So there really is a bit of a continuum of support in place to ensure that you're not alone throughout this process and that there's kind of support all along the way. So just wanted to bring some context into that, because I know sometimes CMHC can seem like this huge place and it's hard to know where to turn. So just wanted to kind of outline that there are, there's supports in place along the way as you figure out what it is that you would like to do. So on the next slide, I know that Michelle had already touched on our aspiration. I wanted to kind of take a few minutes to situate us both with this, but the strategy in general. So our goal really is housing affordability for everyone, and the National Housing Strategy is one of the ways that we'll get there. And so when we talk about the aspiration, we really talk about housing for everyone, regardless of citizenship. We talk about, again, housing that everyone can afford based on their specific needs. And then finally, even when housing is affordable, we still want to ensure that the person has security in the space that they are, and that their housing is a place from where they can really participate in their community, and that it responds to the particular needs of the person, because we know that the same model doesn't work for everyone. And so that's, I think, going to be a bit of a recurring theme throughout what I'm going to chat about today. So, specifically when we talk about more marginalized populations, really want to ensure that housing is inclusive and works for them as well. So if we move forward to the third slide, just wanting to kind of highlight that the National Housing Strategy really started with a vision for inclusive housing. So a vision that went beyond seeing housing as just a roof over someone's head. So really looking at housing throughout these three sort of pillars that you see here, so people and communities and partnerships. And I think this piece is important because it really, I think, plays into our eligibility criteria as well. So it'll sort of help, I think, set the foundation for how we prioritize projects. So in terms of people, the strategy really looks to address the housing needs of everyone in Canada, as I said, and again, really want to highlight the need to create solutions for more marginalized Canadians, so seniors, women and children fleeing family violence, Indigenous communities, folks living with mental health and addiction challenges, etc. So again, that is going to be one of our prioritization pieces for our projects as well. In terms of communities, the strategy really looks to create a new generation of housing in Canada. So housing that's going to be more inclusive, more sustainable in the long term, more accessible, and those social outcomes, and again, we'll review them in a couple slides, but again, they're going to be embedded in all of our programs, and that's the way our applications are prioritized as well. And then finally, partnerships. So I know that Michelle touched on this as well, but such an important piece of the conversation. So the strategy really looks to create opportunities for collaboration among all levels of government, the nonprofit sector, cooperative housing providers, the private sector, academia, to really make a meaningful difference, because none of us can really do it alone. And so again, partnerships are going to be evaluated when we prioritize projects as well. The last thing I'll say here on this slide is that today we're going to talk about two of the key areas where the National Housing Strategy create funding opportunities. So we're going to talk about the creation of new housing supply and the modernization of existing housing supply. However, there's other funding streams like resources for community housing providers and also innovation and research. And if you're interested in some of the opportunities in those other areas, always happy to chat about that after. So on the next slide, the Housing Continuum, just wanting to note that the National Housing Strategy initiatives offer a broad range of options for each part of the continuum that you see here. So just wanting to highlight that we really do have opportunities from the left to all the way to the right there. So if we move forward, again, wanting to kind of show the range of options of our programs depending on the specific need of the community and the specific project. I'm not going to talk about all of these programs today, just a few, but we really do go on a case-by-case basis and really try to figure out what will work best for the group that we're working with in the specific situation. We also, on top of these programs, also have programs that kind of come and go. So obviously the Rapid Housing Initiative isn't listed on here. We have an Indigenous Shelter and Transitional Housing Initiative, a Women and Children's Shelter and Transitional Housing Initiative as well. So those programs aren't listed on there, but these are kind of our core group here. And then just to say as well that all of our programs are stackable also, so they do work together. So on the next slide, I wanted to touch briefly on our prioritization criteria. This is really it in a general sense. Depending on the program, the depth of some of these will change and the requirements will change in terms of, like how deep you have to go on some of these criteria. But in a general sense, they really do cover all of the programs. I do like to highlight that the criteria that we talk about for each program are minimums. So meeting them is going to make you eligible, but trying to go above the minimum is going to make your project more likely to be approved as well. So I'll just read through these. So again, the piece that I talked about earlier, so the whole project or a portion of the project serving a specific population or who the intended residents are in a particular project. We'll also look at financial viability, energy efficiency, accessibility, access to transit and services. We'll look at the depth and the duration of affordability, and then we do have a minimum threshold of 5 units for all of our programs as well. So if we move forward to RC funding, I wanted to jump right into what's available. I'm going to keep things really high level today, but if you wanted to get more information, I'm always happy to chat about it after. So to start off, seed funding can really provide contributions and or loans to assist with the planning costs of building a new project. So really when you're in that stage of conceptualizing what it is that you're going to do, of planning your project, and you can, because the program is stackable, you can do seed funding to prepare some of the reports or some of the paperwork to get ready for our other funds. Here, the maximum amount that you will receive and the percentage of contribution versus loan really depends on the proponent and the impact of the project on the community. I will say, as you can see, that there's two sort of streams to seed funding. So the new construction is really for pre-development activities for new affordable housing supply, but we do also have a preservation stream that's specifically for community housing providers that already have or have had an agreement with CMHC in the past. On the next slide, I wanted to give you a brief overview of the types of activities that are eligible through SEED. There's more, but just so you get the gist of sort of what you can do with the SEED funding, so things like business plans, site surveys, preliminary design, site drawings, all of those types of things. So it's a good resource to be able to move some of those preliminary activities forward. So on the next slide, which by the way I can't see, so I hope we're in sync today. So the rental construction financing initiative, this fund provides low-cost repayable loans to create regular units only. So it's really just for standard apartments, so not housing for seniors or supportive housing. It really focuses on a stable offer of a regular rental unit. The program provides low-cost loans, as I said, during the riskiest phases of financing. It's going to have some creative features, so it's going to have fixed-rate loans, some 10-year, up to 10-year terms with one low interest rate, up to 50-year amortization periods that are available as well. So it's a program that provides incentives for projects that are going to have great social outcomes in place as well. And as always, we always look for projects to meet and also exceed our eligibility criteria on the social outcomes that I talked about before. Again, I'm not going to get too much into the weeds today, so happy to chat offline about the actual criteria for the program. So on the next slide, I wanted to highlight an example of a project that's received funding through the RCFI, the Rental Construction Financing Initiative. This is a project called the Portside in Summerside. It's a 7-story, 70-unit development, and here 2 of the floors, so about 30 units, are going to feature below market rental units that are allocated to the PEI Housing Corporation. And so to those 2 floors, the 30 units, the PEI Housing Corporation is going to house tenants off their wait list in those units through a rent geared to income model. The project is in the heart of the city, so it's close to services, and really partnerships were key to bringing this project to life. So the Port Corporation of Summerside provided the piece of land at a subsidized rate, and then again that partnership with the province where they're able to house tenants off their wait list, that was also a key partnership for this project. So moving forward to the National Housing Co-Investment Fund, I would want to state that whereas the RCFI that we just talked about is about supply of new rental units, the Co-Investment Fund is more about addressing the demand for, again, more marginalized groups that are in higher need, and we find that this fund is more accessed by nonprofits as well. And so, given the nature of these projects, this fund is going to feature a mix of contributions and grants, whereas the RCFI that we just talked about is just low-cost loans. So the co-investment fund provides, as I said, a mix of loans and contributions. We do have a new construction stream again, and a renovation stream for all existing housing providers, affordable housing providers. Just like with the previous fund, I didn't want to go too much into the details, but I'll just highlight some of the main kind of minimum requirements to give you an idea of, like the most important pieces of this fund. So as always, we have a minimum of 5 units or beds. We do want the primary use of the space to be residential. although we do allow for some non-residential space as well. So if you wanted like part or maybe like one floor or a certain portion of the project to be like a social enterprise, or you wanted to rent out some offices, or rent out some commercial space, like those are all things that will help make your project more viable. So we do allow for some of that non-residential space. And then again, co-investment projects have to meet minimum requirements for partnerships, financial viability, affordability, energy efficiency, and accessibility. And so partnerships here are a really central feature, and I think that's why we keep going back to it throughout our presentation. So a really central feature of the co-investment fund. So here, CMHC funding has to be supplemented by an investment from either another level of government, so a municipality or province, or another investor that's come around the table to support your project. So the investment itself doesn't have to be financial, although it will obviously help the viability of your project, or it helps bring the project to life, but it doesn't have to be a financial investment, and so in-kind investments will also count as a partnership. So as an example, when we talk about the different ways that municipalities can support projects, we will always consider things like breaks on taxes, speeding up construction permits, or speeding up applications to the city as a partnership. Like, to us, that shows that the municipality supports the project. So those are all pieces that we'll take into consideration as well. And of course, bigger things like grants and land donations as well. So on the next slide, wanted to highlight a more local project. So here, this is a project that received a financial commitment from CMHC for the construction of Martha's Place, which is an affordable housing project in Charlottetown. They received support from all three levels of government, the province and the city. It's a project that's owned and operated by King Square Affordable Housing Corporation, and the 4-story building will also offer on-site part-time social services from the Sisters of St. Martha. Here, 50 affordable units are leased to the PEI Housing Corporation, who in turn is going to lease, again, the units to folks off of their wait list on a rent geared to income model. And then the remaining 10 units are going to be rented to the general population at market rate. The province of PEI supported the project through some construction grants as well. And the property is proposed to have 83% of the units as affordable, 30% of the units as accessible, and some energy savings and reduction of greenhouse gas emissions by 68%. I know as well that I think we have the benefit of, or we were going to have, I'm not sure if Bill Campbell is in the room, so the president of King Square. So if he is, I think it would be really great to hear from him as well after we wrap up today, to either add a few things or correct me if I said anything wrong, or just in general provide his perspective as well on the process, so and on the project as well. So we'd love to hear from him around Martha's Place. So as I wrap up, I wanted to, on the next slide, just chat about this really quickly. So as we've gone through project examples, obviously we've talked about partners being a really important piece, and there's lots of different ways that partners can come around the table. And so wanted to bring some different examples specifically in relation to municipalities and do a bit of a bird's eye view on potential strategies. I've included a couple of slides in the presentation so you can have them as a resource. Again, there's lots of different tools, lots of different options, and if you are interested in taking a bit of a deeper dive, I'm happy to support with that after. But generally just wanted to provide a bit of a picture on what's available. So, municipal tools, we really talk about them all working together. So, and kind of complementing each other as well. So policy tools, so things like community plans and strategies, will also really complement regulatory tools that are really there to enable affordable housing production. So things like incentives, and are also there to protect the current supply as well. And then financial tools also, so things like direct funding and land contributions, and then exemptions or waivers around particular costs. On the next slide, there's a big overview of all of the different tools. Again, just wanted to make sure that they were there as a bit of a resource. If you look in the middle row, there's some great examples of tools that would really count as a partnership in our books for project-specific contributions. So things obviously like direct funding, so contributions, grants, forgivable loans, land-based contributions, which can be like anything from a donation to temporary use on city-owned land. And then again, exemptions, so like tax credits, waiving fees or charges. Some of these things I know that are already in place, but just wanted to provide you with sort of a broad range of options as well. And the rest of these I think are just helpful and enabling resources to have in place to really support the development of affordable housing.
Okay, Marina, are you finished or?
Yeah, I'm on the last slide. I was going to say one last thing.
Okay, do it.
Just wanted to state, I just wanted to state that we have a pretty large toolbox at CMHC, so we have lots of research and data and guides and other funding programs as well around innovation and research as well. So if there's anything that keeps coming up, like issues around NIMBY or accessibility or whatever it might be, don't hesitate to reach out as well. Always happy to share what we've got. And now I'm done.
Okay, thanks. My apologies for jumping in there. Bill Campbell is indeed in the room, and he did blush a little, so that's good. So, excellent. Thank you for the overview, both of you. I'm a lot smarter than I was 45 minutes ago, and very grateful for that. I assume we're doing questions and answers now. Okay, you're first.
Well, I just wanted to say that the key to what Marina was talking about is partnership. And in order for us to pull the project off Paul Martha Place, we had to have a good partnership, a good relationship with the city, Mr. Mayor, and council. With the planning department, we talked to them many times, and we managed to work out a deal with the city where we had a reasonable compensation in terms of a tax rebate or a tax incentive, we'll call it. So that was very helpful. The province was very helpful. They provided us with the land. The Sisters of St. Martha blew us away when they come up and said that we would like to participate financially. And they gave us $900,000, which really made CMHC look up and say, wow, this thing could be viable. And all these partnerships put together gave us what we have today. We signed a mortgage for 40 years, renewable every 10 years, and the first 10 years we're into a 0.87% interest rate, Mr. Banker. And everything is going well. The place was full before we started. The province was all excited that they had access to their files to fill the place with 50 units. We have a manager on site, and the manager works very closely with the province, and it's working out really well. We had a couple of situations where some of the tenants that were coming into our project were not used to living the way we want them to. And so what we had to do was put in what do you call monitors and stuff to make sure we knew what was going on in different parts of the building. And we come up with some interesting situations. We had to, for example, somebody was selling drugs and stuff like that. We just have to be on top of it, because we're dealing with some people who are some very vulnerable clients who really need our help. And needing our help means having good surveillance, know what they're doing and how they're doing it, and be there on the spot to correct them if they're not living within the parameters that we set out. I don't know what to say. It's just a beautiful project. It's very successful. We're trying to do something similar in Summerside, but we won't talk about that today.
For Summerside Council.
Yeah, and I think I have Michelle talked into coming to Cornwall with me for a presentation to the Cornwall Council. Mayor Brown is invited. I don't know what else to say. If you have any questions, more questions about me, please ask. It's just a really great project, and thank you, CMHC. Thank you, the City of Charlottetown. Thank you, the province of PEI. Thank you, Alex, and your team for helping us put it together. That's it.
Thank you, Bill. Everybody in this room is taking credit for that project now. So.
I don't blame you. You should.
Okay. More questions, comments, whatever.
Could I just ask a quick question?
Mayor Brown, I
First of
will
all, I want to
identify
thank
people.
Alex and his team for being here, Robert and Emily, because it shows that there is support from the planning department and making this work. Michelle and your team, thank you for accepting Bob's invite, because this advisory committee has been very critical in addressing housing, first through the short-term rental issue, and now we're moving into providing more affordable and accessible housing. But Michelle, or I think maybe particularly Marina, you talked about barriers in development at the municipal level, and I think that's addressed in the 2022-2023 federal budget, where they talk about launching a new housing accelerator fund, which will send funds, provide funding for municipalities to speed up the process for applications. But Michelle, there's another issue too. There are some developments that are in the queue within the city of Charlottetown, I'm sure within the capital region, that are being slowed down because they can't get the check off from CMHC. There is a project here in the downtown that is being held up at our level because CMHC has not checked off the box yet. So I think it has to be a back and forth, going both ways. Yes, we have to do our due diligence and follow due process, but we have to be working in concert with the CMHC. So it's I can talk to you about it after.
Certainly.
This project. It's again, we're trying to push the envelope to get more housing in the market and more focused on non-market instead of market value. And that's why I wanted to come here today, just to express one of my concerns about the process on both sides of the equation, CMHC and the city.
Right. Can I ask you, when you say that you're waiting for our check, like funding approval, is that what you mean?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. Some of the projects are held up because our process, the process we have in the city, is that CMHC has to check off that box that the funding is in place. And that again is to ensure that the developer will adhere to providing affordable units, whether it's 25% below market value or 80% up the median in the geographical area.
Okay.
Thank you. And thank you again for making the presentation.
Our pleasure.
Great presentation.
I never mentioned Michelle. I should have mentioned when I was handing out kudos to everybody. I forgot to mention APM, Tim Banks.
Yes.
Without them, it wouldn't have happened. And he's a world-class builder. He's controversial, but he's good.
Yep.
Okay, other questions or comments? We don't always have to give compliments, but it's really good to do. Paul, any questions?
No, I'm good.
We'll get a copy of the presentation, won't we?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, Ellen, you have a copy of the slideshow, right? And you,
Oh, good.
and Marina's slideshow, that's excellent, Marina, I appreciate it. I don't quite have that last slide memorized, but I'm working on it. That's why I need my own copy. Also in your speaking, your presentation, can you get a copy of that?
I can give you speaking notes, yeah.
Yeah, it was really good, okay. I have a question about community housing, which I think we call public housing. And in our committee here, we've identified that we don't seem to have enough, to be honest. And what's available briefly on the 10,000 mile level, you know, and how do we get that started? Even as a whole committee, you might be interested in that. Michelle, or Marina?
So when you say public housing, you mean projects supported 100% by the province or the government?
Yeah.
Right. So part of what Marina touched on for the National Housing Strategy, we feel that the best success are mixed projects. So to integrate individuals that need affordable housing with market projects. It gives better communities, it makes them inclusive and contributing members. So the National Housing Strategy really focuses on supporting projects that are going to be viable long-term without long-term government subsidy. So we're trying to get away from what we used to call public housing and really support projects upfront to get them off the ground and set them up so that they're viable and sustainable long-term.
So Martha Place would be the next generation of that, right, where it's mixed?
100%.
Yeah.
We had to come up with, or we came up with 18 fully accessible units out of 60,
Yeah.
which impressed CMHC.
It did. It went above our minimum. It was a good project.
exactly.
Yes.
So going to mass has paid off all these years.
Well, we aim to please.
And we're really working closely with other levels of government, the municipality, the province. So the province, we've signed a bilateral agreement with the province. So they get funding through the bilateral agreement. They've launched a PEI and Canada Housing Benefit. So that's a housing subsidy that goes directly to tenant. So it gives them the ability to choose where they want to live. So if they choose to spend a little bit more money on housing because it's closer to where they work, their kids go to school, it gives them that flexibility. The province also has a rent supplement, which subsidizes units. It allows tenants to pay 30% or 25% of their income, what we call RGI, rent geared to income. So it's all different ways to make projects available, but it's not, or affordable, but it's not all what we traditionally used to refer as public housing.
Okay.
I think the issue though is that such an emergency in housing that if you try to develop market rents, you know, or 80% of market or whatever with public sort of housing projects, there's so much demand that, and there hasn't been enough done in the last, say, 10 years or more in that space that it's built up, and now we've got to push out a lot of projects in order to, you know, provide housing for people that they can afford. I think that's really the issue. Ideally, you'd love to be able to do this mixed approach, but in the long run, that's great. But if there has to be these projects going through on a continual basis on a scale enough that, you know, it can be done, that people can afford to live.
Right. No, supply is definitely an issue and affordability as well. And as I mentioned, when you have a supply issue, it's going to put even more pressure on affordability because people tend to pay a little bit more, people that can't afford to pay it. So typically with market rents, if the provinces gives rent supplements, even though a project is considered market, it may all be affordable units because the province gives rent supplements. So there's different ways that we can align our resources to make projects more affordable. But no, I acknowledge it is a challenge for sure.
So, Michelle, just to follow up on the accelerated fund, pushing more money on municipalities, will that fall under CMHC or the Department of Finance?
CMHC,
It will.
yeah.
And just to follow up on Paul's question, on rent guaranteed income.
Yeah.
So some of these projects that you've identified, Martha's Place, there's also Charlotte Court, these are 10-year contracts, so they have to be renewed.
Yes.
It's up to the developer to say, well, I don't want to renew it, I want to go full market. That's the issue with the partnership. I fully agree with partnerships, but when it's owned and operated by a community, whether it's provincial or federal government, I think there's more stability, long-term stability. And I don't think CMHC is looking through those lenses on the long-term for owning and operating.
Yeah, so I definitely acknowledge that, and the National Housing Strategy, we actually prioritize community groups specifically for that reason. So there's no doubt that if we fund or prioritize community groups, once the project is no longer under agreement, because they're a nonprofit in the community group, they're going to keep those units affordable. If we finance the private sector, they still have to maintain it for 20 years, so it's two renewable 10-year term. And you're right that at the end of 20 years, they do have the ability to go to market. But for that specific reason, we do prioritize community organizations when we prioritize units.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
My last question, my last point is the definition of affordability. We have two that sometimes run into each other. You know it. We all know it. What are our thoughts on that? By us, I mean you.
No, as I mentioned in the beginning, that's a comment that we hear a lot of. People would like a clear definition of what is affordable, but it's by design that we don't want one definition of affordable, because there's not one affordability definition that meets all the housing need. So depending who you target, affordability means different things. So it's the numbers speaks for themselves. Like it would be great to ask all new projects to be affordable. The numbers just don't work. Unless you have a lot of partnerships, the projects won't be viable at today's current market rents and the cost of construction. It doesn't work, right? So if we want to incentivize groups, nonprofit or private, to offer affordability, we can't put the requirement too low, because they're going to lose money doing it, and as a result, they're not going to offer it. So by adding supply, it will release pressure on affordability. So for a supply program such as the rental construction finance, for example, our requirement's not going to be as high because it's a supply program. We want to add units to the market. When we talk about the National Housing Co-Investment Fund, that one we do ask for more social outcomes, so our definition of affordability is going to be a little bit deeper affordability, because that's the design, and we give a little bit more benefits. We give contributions to non-profit groups that need it from a viability perspective. So although it's a little bit more challenging for everybody to understand that definition, I think it's the right approach to target the units that we need.
Yeah.
So Michelle, if somebody says to me, like, affordable housing, I'm confused about it, even though I'm heavily involved. They say to me, it's not public or it's not market. So finish that sentence. Affordability is not public, not market, what is it?
Affordable means that the individual living in those units don't pay more than 30% of their income. Like that's the test for core housing need. So typically that's what we would aim for.
One of our programs is the rent supplement program. We use 25%.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Robert, do you have your hand up?
Just a question based on your criteria for affordability and even defining affordability. Has CMHC ever looked at taking a market-based measurement, like apply, cost of utilities, cost of food, that includes inflation, and then generating from that how much of your total population of the region or area you're looking at actually falls below that 30% or goes beyond 30% paying their income. So, for example, Turner Drake Associates, a consulting firm in Halifax, conducted a market-based measurement approach where they looked at the cost of living and factored that in with rising rents. And they found that, CMHC could define it as core housing need about 8%, but when they actually looked and they did the calculations on cost of living, actually ballooned to almost over 40%. So for example, Charlottetown was at 42%, PI was just at 40%. So those technically per the definition, right, for core housing need, you have that much of the population actually going beyond paying more than 30% of their annual income. So I guess my question then is, when CMHC is looking at core housing needs and trying to do problem identification, are you going to take, or is there a plan to take a more accurate, look at and to do a more accurate calculation, a formula based on looking at other cost of living standards than just to say the set rent itself? And then I have a second question.
Do you want to answer that one first?
But yeah, answer that one first. And I'll move
Before
my
I
second.
forget
Yeah,
what the...
Sure.
So that's a really good question and really good comments, and it is discussions that are happening in the industry. So core housing need, to your point, is just shelter costs. So we only look at shelter costs, and it's 30%, and it doesn't only include rent, it includes the right number of bedrooms for the occupants, and also the condition of the unit. So if it's not in good repair or you don't have the right number of bedrooms, you would be in core housing need. We do have another hardship, what we call a hardship measure, and it includes things such as transportation and food. And you're right that the 4 Atlantic provinces, even though we have lower core housing need nationally, we are the top 4 provinces on the hardship measure. So we spend, or our population spends, more than the rest of the country when we include transportation and food. It's a debate that's happening. There's different school of thoughts as to which one's the best one to include, because it's not a one size fits all. I can choose to live next to my work in the city downtown, and I can walk everywhere. My kids go to school, so I don't need a vehicle. Or I could live outside the city, live in a rural community, spend a little bit less for housing, but I spend more for transportation. So it's, every measure has their pros and cons, but we do have studies published on our website specific to that. But right now, core housing need is the measure that we use across our programs and the National Housing Strategy.
Or work from home.
What's that?
Or work from home.
Exactly. The pandemic may be changing this formula, but yeah.
Robert, we'll give you the last question until you advertise it.
Kate was warning.
So my next question, and actually Stats Canada just released a study this month, at the rising gap between home ownership and then also income versus rentals. And one of the items that they looked at was that 20% of homeowners own approximately 40% of the total properties. So we're seeing high commercialization, and then that's either real estate investment trusts, REITs, purchasing up apartments, usually multifamily developments, renovating them and then renting them at a higher cost. Has CMHC looked or conducted a study, maybe in partnership with Stats Canada, that's looked at the impact that maybe some of these real estate trusts have actually impacted the local market? Because you're talking about supply and demand. That's a good example where you have an uneven or an unadvantaged playing field between a regular home buyer even, say, versus some of these investment trusts.
So that's a good question. We've actually financed a study on REITs and the whole financialization of the industry. So that study is published on our website as well. I can send you a link if you're interested. It is something that's looked at, and it's actually, there's actually home buyers bill of rights as well that's published in the last budget. So I think the federal government will take measures to ensure that that's not taken advantage of.
And just one more comment if I may, and this is very highly tied to affordability. And in fact, there was a Sage journal just published a study that Berlin did. They looked at 500 districts, and they looked at the correlation between the rise of Airbnb or short-term rentals, commercialization, I guess, of private properties, and seeing that correlated. And now we have definitive numbers now that we do see there's a direct correlation that impacts housing prices, but also affects rental prices as well. So I guess my next question would be, does the government have any plans to maybe even look at that type of commercialization? Because it's almost like an investment trust. I can tell you personally, looking at a lot of our records, we have some property owners that own, between 10 and 15 properties, and that's just a single owner, right? So they'll have a corporation somewhere else, and then they'll register all of these properties, right, under a corporate account, right? It's a numbered company, right, under tax. So I guess my next question is, has that been looked at? Again, it's really the commercialization of private properties that we're seeing as creating this huge gap, right? And we're seeing a lot of that investment, even foreign investment, coming in as well as purchasing, because Canada's housing market is seen as a safe haven. Surely more safe, I would say, than the States because of some of the banking and financial tools that are available, and also some of the security checks in place. But then at the same time, is there a check and balance in place to ensure that it's not becoming too much of an investment haven at the expense of true affordability and availability of housing?
Yeah, good question. So it is definitely something that's on the radar for the federal government, and it was part of it was included in the last budget. So as the details come out, I think you will see some of that. It's definitely talked about a lot. However, I don't think it's the biggest. Supply is really the biggest issue that we're seeing across the country. When there's a supply issue, it puts a lot of pressure. I don't think what you're talking about has the highest impact, but it still has an impact. And it is, and I want to commend the city because I think you're putting measures in place to control that.
Short-term rentals.
Short-term rentals, yeah.
Thanks to Robert and the team down there planning.
Yeah. So it is definitely having an impact, and it is. I think you're going to take measures as part of the last budget to try to focus on all those areas, but I don't have a lot of details specifically as far as what's going to be done or how it's going to play out.
Okay.
Can I add something, Michelle? Just really quick.
Okay, Marina?
Okay. Sorry. I guess I would add that we have, some innovation programs through which we fund groups to look at complex issues like this, and we have funded a few groups. There's some, we call them solutions labs, where different stakeholders will come around and try to unpack these big issues like you're talking about. And so I can send you the links afterwards as well, but we have had some groups unpack both the financialization of housing and then also the piece that you were talking about earlier around around home ownership as well, and how, some generations in general are being squeezed out of the housing, the home ownership space. So I can send you some of that. I think some of those labs are still ongoing and they're chipping away at some of that stuff, but it might be interesting to kind of stay in the loop as to where they go and where they end up and kind of what solutions they might find.
Okay, we would appreciate that. Thank you very much, Marina. I signed up for an hour meeting every month. We're a little over it, so the next one will be shorter. We were saving Robert for the end of the meeting, but anyway, thank you for those questions. We have a little housekeeping to do, very short, but before we do that, very much like to thank Michelle and Marina, and someday we're looking forward to seeing you here, Marina, come in lobster season, and for this presentation. I think it's been a really good meeting. It'll inform a lot of our work in the next few months for sure. And we look forward to continuing relationships here. And I'd like to thank Mike for his first meeting somewhere in his truck in Pennsylvania, and all the rest of us that are here. We have Ellen, you want us to approve the minutes, right? To publish them? Okay.
Does Michelle have to stay here?
This will take 1 minute. We're not talking about minutes. Okay, I need a mover. Thank you, Paul. A seconder. Thank you, Robin. All in favor of approving those spectacular minutes I took? In favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, I've done that. Next meeting is the third Tuesday in May. Jamie McDonald, our former member and the Deputy Minister of Housing and whatever else is in public, I can't remember the name of it.
Social development.
Social development. She's coming along with our acting director of housing services. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Michelle.
You're welcome, thank you.
Now we can have the after meeting.